Stay tuned for Live on the Fly with Randy Credico coming up. It is 3 p.m.
All right. Randy Credico Live on the Fly, and we have a great show. Craig Murray, I was out late with Craig Murray and with you, Reggie, and with Garland Nixon and with Dimitri and a whole bunch of others last night. We have Ray McGovern here, the redoubtable Ray McGovern, to talk about everything. All things war, all things ice is Ray McGovern. And I know, Ray, you can do a filibuster until we get Craig here with no problem. So Craig is on his way. He's in a cab. He's in a cab coming in by the UN, and he's on Atlantic Avenue at a construction site right now. Let's just talk a minute about him, because you gave Mr. Ellsberg an award just before he died, and like I said, Monday he died on June 16, 2023. What a treasure he was, Ray.
He certainly was. Yeah, he was a completely selfless, dedicated person to justice, and his only regret in life was that he didn't speak out sooner in trying to stop the war on Vietnam. Now, in reality, he did speak out soon enough. I mean, not soon enough, but at least right after the Tet Offensive in January, February 1968, he did leak information which, together with other leakers, persuaded Johnson to stop the bombing of North Vietnam, to go to negotiations, and not to run for office again. So Dan realized that he could speak out, but on the major stuff, he couldn't get any cooperation from people in Congress, including Senator Fulbright. He couldn't get anybody important to actually do what he eventually ended up doing, and that is giving it to several newspapers. And the New York Times, actually, there's a little story here. I was with Dan at the New York Times, a splendid new big auditorium on one of the anniversaries of the Pentagon Papers. And Dan said, this is the first time I've been invited into the inner sanctum of the New York Times. I said, really? Yeah. He said, then, I have mixed emotions about this because, he told me this. He said, we listened to people like the former executive director of the New York Times, who was there, and then the executive director then. Anyhow, what happened was the former director said, look, everybody says we were real courageous in publishing the Pentagon Papers. But, truth be told, we knew that other papers had copies. And so we really kind of have to fess up and say it was a matter of competition as well. Yeah, there was guts, but that's how we decided finally. So the Times was good in putting them out. The Times would not do anything like that anymore, and that's a sign of the times, no pun intended.
The sign of the times. It's been like that for a long time. You remember their reporting in Nicaragua back in the 80s?
Sure. And
James
of course,
Lemoyne?
on Iraq, they were awful. They still have one of the main culprits on Iraq weapons of mass destruction. His name is David Sanger, and he and Judy Miller were, neck and neck and trying to promote the tale about weapons of mass destruction and all. Matter of fact, I tracked down one piece that Sanger co-wrote in July of 2000 and this must be 2002, and he was saying, look, there is weapons of mass destruction, or there are. He said it 7 times in the same piece. Now, that was the same week that George Tenet, the head of the CIA, told his opposite number, Sir Richard Dearlove of MI6, that the president had decided to make war on Iraq, that he would explain it, he would, quote, justify it, end quote, by saying that the Iraqis had weapons of mass destruction and they were about to give them to terrorists, and here's the crucial sentence, the policies and the facts are being fixed around the policy. So the facts were being fixed. Now, that's from a briefing that Sir Richard Dearlove gave to Tony Blair 3 days after he talked to George Tenet at CIA headquarters. I know people who were there, okay? So here's Sanger getting the word at the same time. And he's, oh, yeah, 7 times. Believe me, cross my heart, hope to die. Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction. And if we don't stop him, the first sign we'll have will be a mushroom cloud. So, I'm down on the times. The more so since they're lousy on Ukraine. They're
just
lousy,
terrible on Ukraine. They've just been
lousy on Gaza. It's awful.
Thank God we have the British papers, the UK newspapers that have been out there telling the truth. Right, Craig Murray? Craig Murray's in the house right now. And
oh, good. Hi, Craig.
Hi there, Ray. Good to hear you.
Get closer to that mic there. At least Ray keeps telling me that. Here's my co-host for today, Tippity Roll, Mr. Craig Murray. He's here. We don't have one of those. All right. You get stuck in traffic, Craig?
Yeah.
I've been stuck in traffic.
Yeah, the junction just here getting onto Atlantic Avenue. There's a construction site going on there. And they stopped all the traffic to let in construction trucks in the night.
Yeah. Ray, you don't have that problem down there, but you remember it in the Bronx how bad it could be on a Friday at 3 p.m. going anywhere, right? Unless you had a helicopter.
Yeah, I have to tell you, Randy, using my southern accent, that it's a lot slower down here, and we just love it.
Yeah, right. Well, have some grits and gravy on me, all right? And some, listen, I know I have my mother's from the South, and all right.
That was just a curveball for me, and I was like, what the?
Well, you never had grits? Grits, and never had colored greens, man? That's what I grew up with. Okra?
Yeah. Without the sugar.
Right.
Without the butter, no sugar.
Well, it's nice seeing you two again after a 12-hour respite, Craig, and you over there, Reggie. How you feeling today, Craig?
I'm feeling much better than I deserve to feel.
Right. The food was great last night.
I can't pretend I had much for food.
I didn't see you eating. Margaret asked me, did Craig try that great food they have there? I said, I'm not sure. I cast out early and took a Subway with Reggie back. So we played Dr. Morandi's response. We kicked off with that to the attack in Tehran, and we definitely want to start talking about that for a little bit before we get into Palestine, Russia, and L.A. or whatever. So your initial response to the midnight or late-night attacks on Iran, why did they do it?
Oh, goodness knows. I can't remember a time when Israel wasn't telling us that Iran is a month away from developing a nuclear bomb. They've been telling us that for at least 25 years. Iran has been a month away from developing a nuclear bomb. And it seems to be the same thing today. I was sitting in my hotel room this morning, just flicking through the domestic news channels here in the States, and all of them were showing this graphic the Israelis had made, showing that Iran could make a bomb in a month, and 12 bombs in 2 months, and in 6 months they could make 50 bombs. And they were all presenting it as though it were true. They were all just presenting this as fact, as opposed to nonsense. And of course, nobody was mentioning the fact that Israel already has nuclear bombs, illegally. But, we're at an interesting time here now, and I'll tell you the first thought I wanted to get over today, and I'd be interested in Ray's take on this as well, which is what Iran now does. Because I was in Lebanon for 5 months, the end of last year, beginning of this year. And in Lebanon, Hezbollah's formidable rocket arsenal was very substantially degraded by Israel over about 9 months of continual air attacks. And I think Iran may have learnt a lesson from that. And the lesson from that would be that if you don't respond massively, if you just let Israel keep attacking, they're going to take out your capabilities. So it's a use it or lose it moment.
Right.
Either Iran now fires pretty well everything it's got at Israel, or it's going to lose that stuff. That stuff's going to get bombed out of existence bit by bit over a lengthy period. So, as I say, I'm really interested to see. But if I were Iranian, that's certainly the lesson I would have learned from what happened to Hezbollah. I would think, right, we've got these ballistic missiles. This is the moment to fire all of them at Tel Aviv. That's how I would be thinking. And I say that to make people realise what an extremely dangerous moment this is and how reckless this whole thing is.
Ray.
Well, hi, Craig. Really good to talk to you, even though I can't see you. Yeah, I think what Craig just said is the operative thing here with respect to what's going to happen now. I'm also interested in why the Israelis picked this time to do this. I just heard, John Mearsheimer on Judge Napolitano's show, and there were lots of reasons adduced, but not adduced or not mentioned was Netanyahu's very precarious political position in the Israeli government. After all, he almost lost it just a couple of days ago. And I'm just wondering what Craig feels, and you, Randy, about the likelihood that that Netanyahu felt that, he needed a war so that people will be rallied to his support, and that way he won't end up in jail. In other words, would I put it beyond Netanyahu to start a regional war so he doesn't end up in jail? No, I wouldn't.
Right.
Look what he's doing in Gaza, genocide. So would I put it beyond Netanyahu to use nuclear weapons as the Samson option? My God, I have little things going up my back here, little chills, because I wouldn't put that beyond them either. So I'm just wondering, Craig, what do you think about the domestic political situation that he finds himself in? Do you think that played a role, at least in the timing?
Can I just jump in and just give you just one thing? Did you ever see White Heat with Jimmy Cagney? I'm on top of the world, Ma. He'd rather blow up himself in this electrical plant than go to jail, all right, in California. And if you've ever been into an Israeli prison or jail, yes, I believe that he'd prefer to bring the whole world down before he ends up in one of those jails. That's my take. All right. Now, Craig, a more thoughtful analysis.
Well, I'm not sure it's more thoughtful. I agree 100% with what you said, Ray. And I'm interested you say that John Mearsheimer didn't mention it in talking to Judge Napolitano, because it would be the number one item on my list of factors. I think that's absolutely why he did it. There's, a real danger that peace is going to break out as far as Netanyahu is concerned. Netanyahu needs constant war to maintain himself in power. But I would say, in the unlikely event Netanyahu ever did go to jail, I'm quite certain that his jail conditions will be not the same as your average Israeli prisoner. But no, I think that's entirely it. Their victimhood narrative is starting to run extremely thin, although it's extraordinary. I mean, the leaders of the Western world say things which the vast majority of the ordinary men in the street all around the world can see are nonsense. Israel launches a totally unprovoked attack on Iran, and Macron has come out, and the first thing he said was, "We support Israel's right of self-defense." This is quite astonishing. If I ever meet Macron, I'm going to smash him in the face and say, "Sorry, Emmanuel, that was purely self-defense. I thought you might be going to attack me."
There's a long line. There's a long line for that, Craig. All right, you'd be at the end of the queue of the 400,000 people.
But this is being used all over the Western world. Politicians are saying that, and people are not stupid. The average man in the street is not a complete idiot. And nowadays, when people are not purely dependent on the television and the radio for their news, people can see that this is nonsense. But it does go back again to falling back on that Israeli line of victimhood. They're now going to divert attention from the genocide going on in Gaza and divert attention to the missile strikes that will come in from Iran, and they will then claim this is Iran attacking them. So it's all part of diverting the gathering head of anti-genocide, anti-Israeli government action feeling, which has been changing in the West. I'm not sure in the United States, but in the UK, very, very notably, about a month ago, the mainstream media, almost as a signal, changed their tone on Israel entirely. And even people like Starmer and Lamy, though they didn't do anything, that's our Foreign Secretary and Prime Minister, even they came out and said that Israelis' actions in Gaza are intolerable and must stop, and this kind of language we hadn't heard before. So there had been a very definite change of tone in the UK, and most people had seen a similar change of tone in many Western European states. I'm not sure that's happened here or not. But Israel was losing control of the narrative internationally, so this is an attempt to seize back control of the narrative by pretending to face extermination from non-existent Iranian nuclear weapons when you're sitting on nuclear weapons yourself. But I'll say another thing, Ray, which I'd be interested in your take on. My take is this. One thing this has done is actually make inevitable that Iran eventually will get nuclear weapons, because it's now plain that possession of nuclear weapons is an existential necessity for Iran, unfortunately. They probably did have the capacity to make nuclear weapons previously, and there was a fatwa on it. There was a religious ruling that nuclear weapons are not in line with Islam, according to the supreme leader of Iran. So they hadn't ever made them, but I think they will now. I think this has made it inevitable, and it may put back their ability to do that a bit, but they'll either make some or they'll get them off Pakistan, or we will now see a nuclear-armed Iran over the next few years.
I'm afraid I agree with you, Craig. Fatwas are pretty important. They're a lot more powerful than encyclicals or other pious statements from Western religions. But I think that, if you look back at the triad of terrorists, the Iraq, Iran, and North Korea, well, you know what happened to North Korea, right?
Yeah.
Nothing.
Yeah.
What happened to Iraq? Well, they got invaded. What happened to Iran? Well, we're going to see in the next couple of weeks. The other example, of course, is Libya. They were persuaded by some really deft diplomacy to give up their nuclear weapons program. And look what happened to Gaddafi. So your logic is very, very appropriate here. It does seem very likely that Iran will develop a nuclear weapon now. And that would probably, people probably need to be reminded it's very few things that I'm proud of with respect to my former colleagues in the analysis part of CIA. But one thing that I am proud of, and that is the National Intelligence Estimate that was written in 2007, which concluded that Iran had stopped working on a nuclear weapon at the end of 2003. So you do the math, 2003. And every year since then, people don't know this because it's not in the New York Times. Every year since that, the intelligence community has stood up and said, yes, we still believe that unanimously, and we still believe that with high confidence. Iran is not working on a nuclear weapon. As a matter of fact, Bill Burns, the CIA director under Biden, he told so many lies that I suppose he felt maybe he'd do a little expiation or a little penance right before he left. And what he said was, and by the way, I'm leaving next week, but I just want to let you know that Iran is not working on a nuclear weapon, okay? Do you remember that? Okay. And also, if they started working on a nuclear weapon, my God, we have so damn many cameras in that. We have so many satellites. We would know right quick if they started working on a nuclear. So relax, guys. I'm telling the truth this time. First time in 3 years. But Iran's not working on a nuclear weapon. Well, so now what is this business about? We have to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. Well, that's bull BS. Okay, that's BS. They're pushing at an open door, and they know damn well that this is not about nuclear weapons. This is about regime change. They want to do in Iran, so it's not a threat, perceived threat to Israel. And I think this time they've bit off more than they can chew, because Iranian retaliation is going to be swift. It's going to be really, really powerful, because they have the kind of missiles that cannot be defended against by these Patriot or other missiles that the Israelis get from us. So, I don't see much hope for avoiding a escalation here, given what's happened just within the last 24 hours.
Has anything actually happened ensuing the initial bombing last night? Has there been any retaliation heretofore? Anybody know?
I don't know of any substantial. I think the Iranians were frankly taken by surprise. The Pearl Harbor analogy has been used, and there's ample evidence that some people in the Trump administration were playing Netanyahu's game by deceiving the Iranians into thinking, oh, no, we got this negotiations going. Oh, no, we're going to meet on Sunday for the 6th. We'll make progress. And all along, they knew damn well what Netanyahu had in mind.
Craig?
Yeah, no, I agree with the last comment. I think that's right. The Iranians have been asked to produce a response for a meeting on Sunday. So that's obviously extremely sneaky. And I think it's unthinkable that the Americans weren't aware this was happening in advance. It's very hard to verify these things, but there are very definite reports on Twitter about an hour to half an hour ago of Iranian missile strikes on Tel Aviv today, including one from a normally quite good source, saying that Iran has hit the Israeli Ministry of Defense with a ballistic missile. But sometimes when these things are reported on Twitter, they're simply not true. It's not easy to be certain. But there was certainly quite a lot of buzz about it, and a belief that the Iranian response had started. But I'm not sure whether that's been verified.
Yeah. Hey, listen, guys, I got to take it's half hour. I got to take a quick break here. And what I'm going to do here, I got to switch a little bit about what's going on in Ukraine. And I want to play, because last week you and I, Craig, talked extensively about the 200-year Russophobia, psyche of the British government. And here's something that came out. This is a song that was written, I think, in 1877. This wasn't recorded, but this is McDermott's song. It's called, and you'll describe it. Maybe you can describe it now. It's called By Jingo, and this is where the word jingoism comes in. I'll just play it, and Craig could elucidate us on it afterwards.
The dogs of war are loose, and the rugged Russian bear, full bent on blood and slavery, has crawled out of his lair. It seems a thrashing now and then will never help to tame that brute, and so he's out upon the same old game. The lion did his best to find him some excuse to crawl back to his lair again. All efforts were no use. He hungered for his victim. He's pleased when blood is shed. But let us hope his crimes may all recoil on his own head. We don't want to fight, but by jingo if we do, we've got the ships, we've got the men, and got the money too. We've fought the bear before, and while we're Britain's true, the Russians shall not have Constantinople.
All right. Have you heard that tune before?
I know the song.
Oh, you do?
And you'll find it in a lot of history books from the 19th century.
Yes, I heard someone talking about it last night. That's why I looked it up.
You've got the... I've never heard it sung. I know the words. I've never heard it sung before.
Yeah.
it was an extremely popular music hall song at the time when Disraeli was threatening to attack Russia over the Treaty of Constantinople, I think, and it was over the size of Bulgaria, whether Bulgaria should be a big Bulgaria or small Bulgaria, and they started up this terrific anti-Russian sentiment, and including by using, and you're right, that's where the word jingoism and comes from. We don't want to fight, but by jingo, if we do, we've got the men, we've got the ships, we've got the weapons too, which was crazy, of course, because the UK had invaded Russia in the Crimean War 30 years before, which hadn't gone very well, and the UK had no capacity to wage war on Russia in the 1870s, and ultimately didn't. But it's interesting, this history of threatening Russia, and the UK has invaded Russia. They invaded Russia in the Crimean War. They invaded Russia in 1917 when they sent an expeditionary force to Murmansk to try to counter the Russian Revolution. So Russia has never invaded the UK, ever. And Russia has never had a plan to invade the UK. Even during the Cold War, the Soviets never had a plan to invade the UK, or any intention of doing so. And it's another, again, nations always portray themselves as victims, and Britain's always portraying itself as Starmer is now, as a victim of Russian aggression, when the Russians have committed no aggression whatsoever. It's very
well. They did poison the Scripples. I'm kidding. All right. Ray, I'm going to throw the ball into your court there, and the Russophobia. Where are we right now? I know you only have 5 minutes left, and you have to jump off and do a show more popular than my show, But where are we? How do you see this unfolding after those attacks? I agree with you on your assessment that the counterattacks or the retaliation by Russia was based on the terrorist attacks in the western part of Russia, not the eastern part of Russia.
Let's stay in the Zionist context here just for another moment, if we can.
Sure.
What I want to say is that this all happened before when the United States and Israel wanted to attack Iran. And all the preparations were made, and that happened in 2007. The attack was going to happen in 2008. And then that estimate came in which I talked about before, showing that Iran was not working on a nuclear weapon. That was published, and George W. Bush in his memoir said, "Bummer, for how could I authorize a strike on the nuclear facilities of a country that the intelligence community says has no active nuclear weapons program? Bummer." Okay, he wrote that actually in his memoir. So that time it worked. Now, every year since, the intelligence community, and prior to this, have reiterated their judgment up to and including 2 months ago, okay? But this time, it didn't matter. So, my conclusion, the Zionists are much more powerful under Trump than they have ever been before. Even logic, even the fact that they don't have a nuclear weapon and are working on one, that doesn't matter. You push that open door and say, you can't get a nuclear weapon, and so we're going to make sure that you are eviscerated, as the Israelis are doing now. This is, as the Chinese used to say, this is going to come to a no good end, okay? A no good end for Israel. Because Israel, I have thought, was, well, the Persians, for the first time in, 4 millennia, have the ability to crush this neighbor, okay, this new neighbor, relatively speaking, Israel. And I think that they will try their best to do it. And my only hope is that China, which has already expressed a willingness to mediate, to be helpful, and Russia, who doesn't want any kind of this ferment right on its southern border, will be able to persuade Trump, look, let's do the sensible thing here. Let's rein in Netanyahu before the whole place blows apart. I think there is some hope there that this can play out this way, but they've got to move pretty quickly because, as Craig pointed out, the Israelis are going in waves and waves, and so far there's been not much of an Iranian reaction. And I agree, it's use them or lose them, and certainly the experience of Lebanon made that very clear.
Ray, I know you have to go in a minute or so, but I heard you talking about Archbishop Romero last week, the saint, Saint Romero to me and many others, in regards to what is happening in Gaza. So if you want to pull that out and read it, and listeners should pay close attention.
I don't have it in front of me, but what he said, of course, and this was 45 years ago, okay, he's in Salvador. The state-run terrorists that were ruling the country were calling upon the National Guard and their equivalent of the Marines to suppress the people. And so what Romero said in his very last homily was, look, there is no law that makes you obey an illegal or immoral act. The law of God is the one you have to obey. I implore you, I beseech you, I beg you, I order you, cese la represión, cease the repression. And I just found it really reminiscent there. You know, here's the National Guard in San Salvador. Here's the Marine or the Marine equivalent. What the hell is, what the heck is the Archbishop of Los Angeles saying, for God's sake? I don't know. But if past practice is any example, there are mealy-mouthed statements about, oh, we love everybody, even though the biblical mandate is to take care of the widow, the orphan, and the refugee.
Ray, I wish you the best. Thank you for being so generous with your time, always with us. Good luck. Good luck in the ring with Larry at 4 o'clock.
Oh, that would be fun.
Yeah.
Now, Craig, enjoy the rest of your visit. How long are you going to be around?
Only a couple more days, Ray, unfortunately. I've got to get back home to Scotland and my family. I've spent a lot of time this last 3 years. I've been abroad a lot more than I've been at home, and I have children who I think need to see rather more of me.
Well, a free Scotland from the sea to the sea is what I would say, and I know that Randy's going to let you expatiate on that later. But we Irish feel very, very akin to your problems in Scotland, and I hope you can break free as we did.
All right. Wait a second. You guys had Jamesons. They only have Scotch in Scotland.
No, they have Jameson there. And they have Scotch, actually, in Ireland, too. So.
All right.
We don't discriminate.
It sounds like I've been drinking a lot of Scotch today. Edward Gregg, Craig Murray, you selected that. You know, I have all of these Scottish folk songs, and I've got clips from Braveheart and some bagpipe music, and you sent me this, and I'm glad you did. But there's a story behind it. He wasn't Scottish, was he? Great.
He was ethnically Scottish. It's an interesting story. He's Norway's most famous composer, Edvard Grieg.
Right.
There is no Norwegian name Grieg.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
That's a clan? That's a Scottish clan?
Yeah, his great-grandfather, or could have been his grandfather, I can't recall which exactly. Either his grandfather or his great-grandfather fought at the Battle of Culloden alongside several of my own ancestors, which was the last great fight for Scottish freedom and independence in 1746. His grandfather escaped after the battle, made it to Poland. The family lived there for a generation or two. Then they migrated to Norway. And like many Scottish families, the eldest son was always called Edward. So Edward Gregg, who fought at the Battle of Culloden, his son was Edward Gregg. His son was Edvard Grieg, the famous Norwegian composer.
Wow, what a great story that is.
It's a good story that nobody knows. So I thought we'd get that out there.
Right. All right. Was he part of the Scottish Enlightenment, but was in Norway at the time? When did he compose that? Now, he was like late 18th, 19th century.
He's late 19th century.
Right. Randy Critical live on the fly with Craig Murray, former ambassador to Uzbekistan, diplomat in West Africa and in Poland, a human rights crusader, one of the most important figures in the freedom of Julian Assange. I can't think of it. You and the late John Pilger. And so many, a political prisoner for some time. And I know you're in town to talk about Scottish independence, and we're going to do the whole last hour on that. We have two people waiting that you know, but we're going to bring in right now our dear friend, who also spent some time as a political prisoner, the great civil and environmental rights activist who you know, Steve Donziger. Steve, welcome. I think you're out there on a boat.
Well, I'm actually not on a boat, but I'm so totally happy to be here. I am on land.
You are. Well, the last time Craig saw you, I was there, the four of us, with Roger Waters when he unveiled his new redux of, what was it, Dark Side of the Moon. That was the last time we all, in fact, I have that picture of the four of us, and you guys seem to get along very well. So, Craig, I'm going to throw it to you since you're the co-host. You would like to ask Steve Donziger a question.
Yeah. Well, Steve, first, it's very good to hear from you again.
Likewise, Craig. Great respect to you, my friend. Great to hear your voice.
Can we kick off by catching up with you and knowing what you're doing now? Because your famous legal activism was for the rights of indigenous people and their protection from pollution by the oil giants. You then suffered this terrible injustice of being it's still, when you say it, it's hard to believe it's true. It's hard to state it in a way that doesn't sound incredible, but you got locked up for acting as a lawyer, and you got locked up by a private prosecution
yes,
brought by an oil giant. But where's the Donziger story now? What are you doing now, my friend?
Well, thank you thanks for being here. Basically, right now, I am mostly focused on writing the story that you just described as a book. And I have a deadline of October 1 to finish this book. So I'm actually working quite hard trying to meet that deadline. And it's really, the story is really the story of the sort of my personal journey on this case and this battle against Chevron on behalf of Amazon communities in Ecuador, over a period of 30 years, because if you can believe it, it's been over 30 years now, and it's still going. So, it cost me dearly in terms of my freedom, in terms of my law license and other things. But, I've been doing a lot of reflecting, and I also gained a lot from it in terms of insight, wisdom, richness of having relationships with people down in Ecuador and elsewhere. And also, just the satisfaction of knowing we actually won the case against this gigantic oil company that stopped at nothing, including, in my opinion, engaging in unethical activities to try to block, the communities in Ecuador from recovering the judgment that they won. So I'm busy with that. I do some speaking. I do a lot of posting on social media about various human rights issues. Of course, like everyone else, I'm, watching the, horrid events in the United States, in LA and elsewhere, and the war that appears to have broken out via Israel's attack on Iran and the attacks on Gaza and Lebanon, Syria, and Yemen, and trying to sort of situate myself for the battles that people need to engage in now and in the months ahead to make sure America does not turn into a completely autocratic, if not openly fascist society. So I think a lot about that, too.
I find myself using the word fascist to describe what's happening increasingly often. And, of course, especially when you're doing any kind of serious analysis, you strive to avoid hyperbole. But it's become almost impossible not to use the word when describing some of the
there's so many. I just read a book, which I recommend if people haven't read it. I think I talked to Randy about this.
Yeah.
I read a book called Hitler's First 100 Days. And, I read it partly because I want to kind of know what happened in terms of his ability to essentially use the constitutional system of Germany to dismantle democracy and to dismantle the Constitution and become a dictator. And I wanted to really see if there were any parallels between the techniques that were used in Germany in Hitler's first 100 days and what's going on in this country since Trump took power. And it was just really shocking. I mean, not shocking. I should say probably wasn't even that surprising. But I kind of feel like the architects of what Trump is doing read that book, like wrote themselves a memo and said we should do this, this, and this. This is the key to taking authoritarian control of American society. And, unfortunately, most of our media in the United States offers no framework for people to understand the events that we're watching with our own eyes, how to connect the bombing of Iran with the deployment of the Marines in L.A. against protesters and citizens, how to connect that up with Mahmoud Khalil's case, the Columbia graduate student who was abducted off the street and was supposed to be released today, but Trump won't release him, and how to connect that up with the Supreme Court and its complete inability, in my opinion, to stand up to Trump, such that the rule of law in our liberal democratic society is really barely hanging on. So there's no framework to really understand a lot of what's happening through the media, and I'm really searching for that framework. And I think the book I just mentioned, Hitler's First 100 Days, is a really good way to understand what's happening in America right now.
That leads me on to question, I guess, that there's obvious intimidation on many levels against protest, against dissent, against freedom of speech. To what extent is that working in terms of a chilling effect on people, of people self-censoring, not making criticisms they might make, not doing as much to defend immigrants who are being deported as they might do? I mean, to an outsider coming in, what struck me most about watching the events in LA and the National Guard deployment, if you like, is the really very small size of the crowds that they're being deployed against often. Not only in LA, but in cities you see scenes of a few dozen fairly harmless-looking demonstrators being herded around by police or troops with riot shields. And it all seems extraordinarily disproportionate. But also I'm wondering are people scared? Are people being terrified into not attending demonstrations and protests?
Okay, so obviously it's hard to quantify and measure that, but my feeling, being, kind of a regular observer of protests in this country is people are not that scared. I think people realize there's still a lot of space in this country to get out on the street and make your voice heard peacefully, obviously. And I agree, the crowds in L.A. are really small. I mean, to me, what's happening in L.A. is Trump is creating a visual spectacle, trying to put soldiers, Marines, National Guardsmen in camouflage, sorry for the background noise, onto the streets. And they want to use these pictures, and they do this via the radicalization network, Fox News, as well as White House platforms. They want to use the pictures to make people believe that the protesters are violent and there's a real threat to law and order. Just, assuming like people see soldiers on the street, they just assume, well, there must be people like, he wouldn't be there if he hadn't done something wrong. Like you hear that a lot. And I think that's the spectacle. It's being used for propaganda purposes to gain political support in Trump's base for a project that is about taking, using the military and putting on the streets of America and taking control of our country and really turning it into a militarized police state. That's what I think the project is right now. And to me, it's lawless. I mean, it's done in the name of law and order, but the project itself is lawless. It's illegal. It seems like no one's been able to stop it yet. is ongoing and will be ongoing for months and years.
All right, we have just a few minutes left, but I do want to play this for you, Steve, and for you, Craig. This is William Kunstler. To your point, this is Bill Kunstler, 1970, after Kent State, and then the attacks on the defendant. The ones that were victimized, they went after them, and there were a couple of false flags in Canada. But this is Bill Kunstler, just a little taste of what he said back this, addressing a fundraiser about Kent State.
The greatest error that the German people made was they couldn't recognize the threat of boots until the boots were outside the door. They couldn't recognize that in a matter of months, a country that produced Beethoven and Liszt and Schumann and Goethe would be on the trail of making landscapes out of human skin. That a year after Hitler's accession, there would be a place known as Dachau, and 4 years later, Buchenwald, and then Treblinka, Auschwitz, and all the rest. That 22 million people would eventually die because people could not get together when there was time to get together. You've got to be one. I just can't stand anymore the idea that we can't be one when we're attacked. And I don't give a damn what you are, whether you're Weatherman or ACLU. The point is, when oppression starts fighting at those who are the most vulnerable, it never stops until it chews up the middle. And I hope the middle recognizes that. Because the occupants of concentration camps were not just the communists before it ended. And that's what could happen anywhere.
Wow. Craig, your thoughts about that?
One thing I love when I come to the States, and I know you're a custodian of this tradition. We had dinner with Margaret a couple of nights ago, and you're aware of standing in the tradition when you're here, or radical opposition. And as Steve was saying, that tradition still exists, and there still is an ability to get out on the streets. But how much longer that will still exist with these processes happening? And the fact, as William was saying in that in that quote, the fact that people don't see it coming, they don't see down the line, they don't notice as it slips away.
All right. Your final words, your thoughts, Mr. Donziger.
Well, thank you for playing that. I want to get that and maybe post it. I have so much respect for that man, but, you know...
You'll get it in 1 hour, I promise you, yes.
Okay, those types of voices are not being taught in our school system. Like, if you went out on the street and asked your average 22-year-old, have you ever heard of William Kunstler, I would bet the vast majority would say, I don't even know who the guy is. And that's deliberate. There's so much we're not taught about history and about past struggles that have been successful or for whatever reason we're not successful, but from which we can learn to deal with the present moment. So, you know, those words are so current in terms of what's going on in the United States today. And I think it's critically important that people all over New York City and beyond act now, as William Kunstler talked about in terms of that era. It's the same thing going on now. People need to recognize the danger, and they need to take steps to act. And they can't act like, oh, it's just that other guy. It's the immigrant. It's the trans person. You know, no. It's us. It's all of us, because this is a direct assault on democracy and free speech that protects everybody. So I love the fact that you played that, and I have such great respect for him. And Randy, thanks to you, my friend, for always bringing up such apt and relevant clips like that on your show.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Steve, and thank you for taking the time out. I know you're like outdoors right now, and it was great to have you here, albeit very, very short. We'll talk soon. Maybe you, Craig, and I can get together for a cup of coffee before.
I would love that. I'd be honored, Craig. I hope we get to see each other before you go.
He's not going to say coffee.
I was about to say whiskey.
All right. All right. Well, you missed it the other day with Margaret and Chuck and Bernadette, and it was a special occasion. All right, we're going to go. We'll be right back.